Well, from the point of view of a Texan, if we look at last year, for example, the drought in Texas was very severe, and we felt it. This year, we don't see that so much. The drought has moved somewhat north and west, and it is really impacting cities like Chicago or even St. Louis and Minneapolis, where the temperature is much warmer than it has been before, where there's very, very little rain, where the soil moisture is dropped, and where the crops are essentially failing. The corn crop, for example, in the Midwest is very extensive. About January or February of this year, it was predicted to be one of the bumper corn crops of the century. And as the drought developed, and this has been called a flash drought. And a flash drought is something that happens in a very short period of time, where most droughts take place over years. This is a very short incubating drought. And it hit very hard. And one of the things that is very interesting in my mind, if you look at the corn crop, the effect of the drought, the corn naturally has pollen that comes out of the top of the corn stalk, and pollen tubes that come out of every ear. That pollen has to go through that pollen tube and impregnate the egg that's in the corn ear and develop the kernel. This year, the pollen developed much before the pollen tubes developed. So the corn didn't get fertilized properly. If it didn't get fertilized properly, the ears won't develop, and our corn crop is essentially failing. We will see that in Texas as a change in the market value of corn. Maybe it'll be double. Maybe it'll be even more than that. We don't know because the drought hasn't completely developed yet, and it is expected to get worse. Now, this drought is not a unique event. We've had droughts in the past. We're all familiar with the Dust Bowl, and John Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath and that sort of business. We also had a big drought and was primarily in Texas during the 1950s. These were very extensive droughts. Both of them lasted 8 to 10 years. Both of them made the farmer suffer. What's kind of surprising to me is there was also a drought in the late 1980s, which wasn't so long, but which was the most expensive natural event, natural catastrophe in the United States ever. Now, I think this year may even surpass that, and last year almost did. So a drought is a recurring thing. Will we continue to have droughts of this magnitude? Yes. Is there a real change in the climate? Yes. What is the climate change doing to the drought situation? It's making it more frequent in my mind. Whereas a particular drought severity might be a 1 in 100-year chance, it might be down to 1 in 50 or 1 in 20 years. If we look, for example, at the number of record high temperatures that we develop every year versus the number of record low temperatures, one might expect on the average that those two numbers would be essentially equal. We'd have just as many record highs as we have record lows. That number was equal during the 1950s, but as the years progressed through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 2000s, that number has gotten to the point where 90% of the records are record highs and only 10% are record lows. What this is indicating is that the temperature is changing, and it is becoming hotter and hotter and hotter. Droughts are caused by a hot temperature, a high temperature, and a lack of precipitation. The combination of the two eventually will end up making the soils drier. Drier soils will impact crops. Drier soils will also impact river flow. The Mississippi River below New Orleans this year, the barge transportation is almost nil because the water isn't deep enough to float a barge. As a matter of fact, the Corps of Engineers is down there right now dredging the Mississippi deeper and deeper. It's not going to work. A question arises, if one assumes that we're having more and more drought conditions, more and more high temperatures, is there anything we can do about it? Well, there are two things. We can either adapt to it or we can mitigate it. To adapt to it simply means we're going to have to learn to live in a hotter and hotter world. We're going to have to change our agricultural techniques. We're going to have to do something like, say, no-till agriculture. We're going to have to do more and more irrigation. On the other hand, as the droughts get more and more severe, we're going to have less and less water. That would mean water conservation. That's kind of mitigation. That's kind of adaptation that one can use. In terms of mitigation, we have to stop forming greenhouse gases, pure and simple. Are we going to be able to do that? I doubt it. At least we won't be able to do it in the next 10 or 20 years, which is when it has to be done. We have too much infrastructure in fossil fuels. We have too much money invested in fossil fuels. We're just too used to fossil fuels. It takes a long time to develop things like wind power and solar power. We could have nuclear power, but to build a nuclear power plant is about a 15 to 20-year project. So learn to live with it. It's going to get hotter, and we just have to be there along with it.